The day my marriage died in a Fulton County courtroom, my father-in-law stood up from the gallery, looked me dead in the face, and laughed. Not a chuckle. Not an under-his-breath snicker. A full, open-mouthed laugh that he let bounce off the marble walls so everybody in that room would hear it. And then my wife, the woman who once held my hand in a hospital corridor for 4 hours while my mother stopped breathing, she smiled at me, adjusted the collar of her cream blazer, and said the ending of our marriage was the best thing that had ever happened to her. That was the moment they made their mistake. Not the laughing, not the cruelty. The mistake was assuming I walked into that room with nothing. I need to tell you something before I go any further. I have gone back and forth about sharing this for a long time, because telling this story means admitting how close I came to disappearing quietly to signing whatever they put in front of me just to stop the bleeding. And if one person listening to this right now is sitting in a parking lot, or a break room, or a quiet house at midnight, trying to decide whether they still have enough left to fight, I needed them to hear what happened when I stopped asking for permission to matter. My name is Callum. I'm from the west side of Atlanta, not the Buckhead side, not the manicured lawn, golf membership side. My people were from the kind of neighborhoods where you fixed what broke instead of replacing it, and where asking for help too loudly was treated like a character flaw. I spent 39 years absorbing that lesson until it lived in my bones. I met Delia Ashworth at a fundraiser her family hosted in Midtown. She was sharp, funny, and completely at ease in rooms where I felt like I had accidentally walked through the wrong door. Her father, Carver Ashworth, ran Ashworth Development Group commercial real estate, mixed-use projects, the kind of operation that had its name engraved on buildings and whispered at city planning meetings. Delia was being groomed to take over, and everyone in their circle knew it. I was a restoration contractor who specialized in historic brick structures. I was good at my work. I was not on anyone's inheritance list. We fell for each other anyway. At least, I fell. For the first few years, it was real. We rented a narrow row house in Kirkwood with window units that rattled every summer and a kitchen so small we had to take turns standing at the stove. She'd come home from long days at her father's office and I'd have something on the table. We talked until late. We argued sometimes. We apologized well. She gave me a coffee mug, old ceramic, hand-painted, a little lopsided, that said, "Whatever comes, we face it together." I kept it on the kitchen shelf like it was load-bearing. Then things shifted, slowly, the way a house settles. You don't notice it until the doors stop closing right. Her role at Ashworth Development grew. Board meetings, investor dinners, property acquisitions. My schedule bent around hers without me deciding to let it. I managed subcontractors so she didn't have to. I coordinated delivery crews at 3 a.m. so she could be fresh for presentations. I handled property inspections on weekends so her name stayed clean on the important calls. I told myself I was proud. I told myself that's what you do when you love someone whose potential is bigger than the ceiling they started under. But then there were the meetings I wasn't invited to. The passwords that changed on shared accounts without explanation. The documents that moved into folders with her name only. When I asked, she'd sigh in that particular way, patient, tired, like I was a child, asking why the sky was blue, and say, "Callum, sweetheart, you're brilliant with old buildings. This is different." Said softly enough, often enough, a sentence like that becomes a wall. The day she asked for a separation, she didn't cry. She stood in our kitchen. By then we'd moved to a place in Decatur, something nicer, and she said it the way you'd explain an overdue bill. Logical. Resolved. This is the cleanest path forward. Not the kindest, the cleanest. Within 72 hours, my debit card stopped working at the gas station. Within a week, the joint savings account was under dual authorization review. I learned that phrase from a bank manager who stared at his monitor the entire time he explained it to me. I tried 3 attorneys. Each one wanted a retainer I couldn't access because the money I thought we shared was now under review. She had locked every door, and then she laughed because I was standing in the hallway. Honestly, if that had been the end of the story, if I had just signed something and walked away, I don't think I would have told anyone. I have spent most of my life being the person who absorbs what happens and calls it strength. But about 8 months before she filed, I found something I was never supposed to find. We had a home network drive in the hallway closet. Small black unit, sat beside the router, hummed day and night. Delia liked everything. Synced phones, tablets, backup files, tax documents, convenience over privacy. That was her system. I was looking for old property survey files connected to a parcel my mother had left behind near Lithonia. She'd been gone about 10 months, and I still hadn't sorted her paperwork fully. That's how grief works sometimes. You manage everything except the thing you can't touch yet. I opened a shared folder expecting scanned receipts and old insurance forms. Instead, I found a folder labeled GVH Internal Draft. I almost closed it. That was my reflex. If it looks like trouble, step around it. Don't complicate things. But then a file name stopped my hand. Caldwell Parcel Marital Leverage Note. My last name is Caldwell. Inside were transfer records, development assessments, consulting fee distributions, and a draft memo with a line that made my stomach go cold. Access to Caldwell land interests contingent on timing of marital dissolution and signature sequence. I read it 4 times. Not because the words were complicated, because I needed them to mean something other than what they meant. That night, I sat in the hallway closet for a long time, with the router light blinking blue in front of me. A few nights later, I walked past her office and heard her on the phone. The door was open about 3 inches. "Don't put it under that account," she was saying. "Move it before any disclosure requirement kicks in. There can't be overlap." Pause. Then, quieter. "Callum won't check. He never has unless I point him there." I kept walking. I folded laundry with hands that moved slower than normal, listening to the washing machine turn, and I made a decision. Not out of anger, out of something colder and more deliberate. I stopped thinking like a husband hoping for fairness. I started thinking like a man who needed documentation. Over the following weeks, I copied only what I had clear legal access to shared backup files, joint account statements, tax records filed under both our names. I didn't guess passwords. I didn't enter anything private. I simply stopped walking past the open doors. Which brings me back to Fulton County Family Court on a Tuesday morning in October. I walked in carrying a legal pad and 1 briefcase. No attorney, no color-coded binders, just paper, a pen, and the specific kind of calm you borrow when you know panic won't help you. The courthouse smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. I could tell who had money before they opened their mouths. It's in how people occupy space, the way they let a room arrange itself around them. Delia was already at the respondent's table in a cream blazer. Her attorney, a man named Prescott Lane, looked like a bank commercial, smooth, cold, expensive. Behind them in the gallery sat Carver Ashworth, her father, and 2 men I recognized from years of dinner parties and holiday gatherings, men who had eaten at my table and called me by my first name. Today, they were here to watch. Judge Anita Corbin took the bench at 8:40. Prescott introduced himself with the casual certainty of someone announcing a verdict rather than beginning a case. When the judge looked at me, I stood. My chair scraped the floor louder than I wanted. "Callum Caldwell, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself." That was when Carver Ashworth laughed. He didn't muffle it. He let it fill the room. "A man who can't afford his own lawyer," he said, loud enough for the back row. "God help him." Delia didn't stop him. She looked at me, and she smiled, and then she said, in front of every stranger in that room, that the day she ended our marriage was the day her life actually started. The day she finally had room to find someone worth her time. I want to tell you what that felt like. Because this is the part people skip over when they tell these stories. They jump to the reversal, they jump to the satisfaction. But I need to be honest. That sentence from her specifically, in that specific room, landed in a place no legal strategy could reach. This was a woman who had held my grief with me, who knew what I had carried for the people I loved, who knew what it cost me to ask for nothing and give everything. She knew exactly where to press. I sat down, I placed my hands flat on the table, and I watched. That is something people consistently underestimate about quiet men. They read silence as emptiness. Usually, silence is filing. Prescott opened his case with a clean narrative. Successful woman, unsophisticated husband, a man too bitter to accept a generous settlement. He spoke about my limited financial understanding, the way someone describes a pleasant dog who keeps wandering into the wrong yard. Then he opened a folder, and for just a moment, I saw a line at the top of the first page. Greenway Holdings Internal Review. I looked away before he noticed me looking. Something shifted in my chest. Not hope. Something with harder edges. I thought, whatever they're hiding, they're working very hard to hide it in the middle of a courtroom where someone is specifically looking. That kind of arrogance is a gift. Prescott kept building his tidy picture. During his remarks, something carried me backward, not intentionally, just the way memory works under pressure. I thought about the first apartment Delia and I shared in Kirkwood. A second-floor unit above a dry cleaner, with a radiator that clanked through the night and one window that only opened halfway. We ate off mismatched plates, and we talked about everything. Back then, she called me steady. When her car broke down, I fixed it. When she was preparing her first major presentation for her father's company and couldn't sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with her until 2 a.m, going through every slide. When Carver told her she wasn't ready to run anything important, I was the one who told her she was smarter than every man in that boardroom and meant it completely. Maybe loving someone too thoroughly is not the same as being loved in return. That is a slow lesson. The case Prescott had built was elegant. Delia as the achiever, me as the obstacle, her wealth as earned, my claims as confusion dressed up in resentment. It was the kind of story that doesn't need to prove anything, it just has to sound smoother than the alternative. When my turn came, I stood slowly. I opened my briefcase. I placed one sheet of paper on the table, not a binder, not a stack. One page, a transfer summary tied to an entity called Greenway Holdings, which appeared nowhere in Delia's sworn financial disclosures. The room did not erupt. Real courtrooms don't work like movies. What happened was subtler. The air tightened. Delia's fingers pressed together. Carver's expression shifted just enough to show the calculation happening underneath the confidence. Prescott was on his feet before the judge could reach for the document. Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell is presenting fragments without context. He's drawing conclusions from materials he is not equipped to interpret. Carver added, from the gallery, that poor men shouldn't attempt to play lawyer. Judge Corbin's voice dropped to a register I had not heard before. Mr. Ashworth, you will not address this proceeding again unless you are called. Is that understood? Carver settled back. His mouth still moved, but only to itself. The bailiff carried my sheet to the bench. Judge Corbin read it, not scanning reading. Her thumb stopped near the bottom of the page. Mr. Caldwell, where did this come from? I explained. Our shared home backup system, joint account statements I was authorized to review, files that landed in a shared folder connected to the marital network and were never restricted. I have a record of every source, I said. Prescott gave a thin smile. So he's claiming a home hard drive made him a forensic investigator. I turned toward him just slightly. No. I'm saying the document exists. That's all. I had learned something from years of structural restoration. You don't argue with a rotten beam. You expose it. You let the weight of the building do the rest. Judge Corbin looked at Prescott. Is Greenway Holdings listed in your client's disclosures? He opened one folder, then another. His assistant leaned in. The silence stretched. We would need time to determine its relevance to the marital estate. The judge's expression didn't change. The transfer date is 6 weeks before Mrs. Ashworth filed, I said. The source account is joint. The amount is just under $1.8 million. Something moved through the gallery. One of Carver's associates, a man named Fletcher Rue, who had laughed from the back row when I introduced myself, stopped leaning in his chair. For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. That night, sitting alone in my rental on the south side of Decatur, a message arrived on my phone. No name, no greeting, just a secure file and one line. You need to hear this before tomorrow. I stared at it for a long time. These days, even generosity made me suspicious. But the sender included a specific date the night before Delia filed for temporary orders, and I opened it. Static. The low ambient sound of a room. Then her voice. Not the courtroom voice. Not the composed, grieving wife voice. Her private voice. Sharp. Tired of performing. He doesn't need to be unstable, she said. He just needs to look unstable long enough for the judge to stop listening. A man's voice, lower, harder to make out. Then Delia again. Keep him locked out financially. No lawyer, no leverage. He'll settle once he accepts no one is coming for him. A pause. Then, quieter. Callum's whole problem is that he still thinks being decent is a strategy. I stopped the recording. The apartment felt very quiet after her voice disappeared. Then I played it again. I want to be honest with you right now, because this is the part of the story where I could give you the triumphant version. The version where I smiled and knew I had won. That's not what happened. What happened is I sat at my kitchen table with both hands flat on the wood, and for a few minutes I seriously considered giving up, not my life the fight, signing whatever they wanted, taking whatever insult they attached to it. Because I was exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that comes from months of being told by every system and every face that you are less than what you know yourself to be. If you have ever been in a room, a courtroom, a conference room, a family kitchen where the people who should have known your worth were actively teaching strangers to dismiss it, you already know that exhaustion. It doesn't make you weak. It means you're human. It means you still have enough left to feel it. I looked at the coffee mug on my kitchen shelf. Lopsided, cracked near the handle, the painted words faded. Whatever comes, we face it together. I thought about throwing it away. Instead, I sat with it for a while. And I thought about what my mother used to say when she repaired old quilts or chipped pottery, that not everything broken belongs in the trash. She meant objects. That night, I understood she might have meant people. The second morning of the hearing, I entered that courtroom with the recording copied to a clean drive and sealed in an envelope. I didn't announce it. I sat down. I waited. Prescott opened with a pivot. Before any testimony, he raised concerns about my emotional stability, my grief after losing my mother, the months of insomnia, the counseling I had sought after we lost a pregnancy early in our marriage. He brought it up carefully, with manufactured concern, the way a man holds a weapon and calls it a gift. "We are not attacking Mr. Caldwell," Prescott said. "We're genuinely concerned he may be connecting dots that don't exist." Delia lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment. Carver looked solemn for the first time all week, like he'd rented grief for the occasion. I waited. When Judge Corbin looked at me, I stood. "My grief is real, Your Honor. So is the document already entered, and so is the recording I'm asking the court to preserve for review." I handed the envelope to the bailiff. The moment the envelope left my hand, I watched Delia's face. What I saw was not the stillness she performed for strangers. It was something underneath the stillness, the beginning of fear. Judge Corbin preserved the recording. The following session, she played it. The room went perfectly still while Delia's private voice filled it. "He'll settle once he accepts no one is coming for him." Judge Corbin placed her pen down carefully. Prescott argued lack of context. The judge said, "The context appears to be litigation strategy designed to misrepresent a party's mental condition." Prescott sat down slowly. For the first time, Delia looked at him instead of the judge. That told me everything. I called Dr. Simone Achebe, the therapist who had treated me after my mother died. Prescott's team had used her affidavit to frame me as emotionally unreliable. Under questioning, Dr. Achebe said she had been contacted by opposing counsel and encouraged to use broader language than her clinical notes supported. "He was grieving," she said, looking at the judge. "He was exhausted. He was not disconnected from reality." The concerns he expressed about financial decisions being made without his knowledge based on what I've heard today may have had a factual basis. In the gallery, Fletcher Rue stopped looking at Delia and started looking at the floor. What came next shifted the case past divorce entirely. I lined up dates, payroll deductions from Ashworth Development employee accounts, missing deposit confirmations, same-day transfers through Greenway Holdings, internal report adjustments, and walked the court through them without accusation. Just sequence. Just pattern. Truck drivers, warehouse staff, administrative clerks who trusted that the money withheld from their paychecks for retirement was going where it was supposed to go. The courtroom changed again, not toward me exactly, toward the truth. Judge Corbin ordered emergency asset preservation. She ordered independent oversight of company records. Prescott Lane filed to withdraw from the case citing a conflict of interest, which is lawyer language for "I am not going down with this ship." Carver Ashworth, the man who had laughed at me in open court and called me pathetic, sat with both hands folded and said nothing. His attorney spoke for him after that. I drove back to Decatur that afternoon without the radio on. The streets were full of ordinary Tuesday kids getting off school buses, people stopped at drive-thrus, a man walking a dog who stopped to sniff every other mailbox. None of them knew what had just happened inside that building. The world doesn't pause for the things that change your life. It just keeps moving, and you find your footing inside it. I unpacked the last cardboard box that night. At the bottom, wrapped in an old dish towel, was the coffee mug. I held it for a moment. The crack near the handle had gone dark with age. The words were almost gone. I thought about what it had meant once, and what it meant now. The promise on it didn't belong to the marriage anymore. It belonged to the version of me who had carried it through every locked door and empty account and open courtroom laugh without letting go of what he knew was true. I put it on the shelf beside a letter my mother had written me years ago that I'd never read to anyone. One line in it. "You were not born to be the spare son. You were the one we leaned on because you never let us fall. I hope someone stands up for you one day, Callum. I hope that someone is you." Here's what this story taught me, not what I want it to mean, what I actually learned sitting in a hallway closet with a blinking router at midnight. Silence has a price. I paid it for years and called it patience, and called it love, and called it strength, and it was none of those things. It was the slow habit of disappearing so others could stay comfortable. The moment I stopped calculating what I might lose by speaking, everything shifted, not magically, not immediately, but in the direction of true. The practical thing I'll tell you, if you are in any shared financial situation and something feels wrong, document what you legally have access to, not aggressively, methodically. You don't need to confront, you need a record. Paper remembers things that people conveniently forget. The question I'd ask you to sit with today, is there something you've been pretending not to notice because noticing it would require you to act? Before you go, I want to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now, because these stories land differently depending on what you're carrying when you find them. And I want to know, did Callum make the right call waiting as long as he did before speaking? Drop a 1 inch the comments if you think he waited too long, a 2 if you think the timing was right, and a 3 if you've been in a situation where someone mistook your silence for defeat. I read these. I actually read them. If this story reached something in you, if it made you feel less alone in whatever you're carrying, please subscribe. There are more stories here. Some of them might be yours. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, businesses, or events is entirely coincidental.